Hi, everyone. Welcome tonight. We're thrilled to have you join us for our webinar this evening, where we're going to be focusing on approaching step one now that it's pass fail, and especially if you are a test taker who might be retaking step one and trying to understand what that might look like compared to how it might have been before, when you took it the first time, if it might have been a three-digit score then, and what that means going forward with the changes that have happened to the exam. And so as we dive in, just to give a quick little synopsis of who we are, my name is Mike Stevens. I am a PGY3 dermatology resident. I've been with med school tutors for over 4 years now and do the whole gamut of tutoring for all of the board exams, step one, step two, and step three, as well as shelf exams and some kind of helping with some of the logistics of residency. I'm thrilled to be joined tonight by my co-host, David. I'll let you take it from here, David.
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is David. I am a recent graduate of medical school, so I'm an incoming PGY1. We're going into physical medicine and rehabilitation. I've been with med school tuners and blueprint prep for a couple years now. Basically, right after I took step one, I had a long history of tutoring prior to that, and I knew I wanted to help students kind of going forward. And so I applied right after and have been with the company for a couple years now. And it's been really, really good experience.
Awesome. All right. So just to kind of, again, take a step back and give a general synopsis of what to expect tonight. Obviously, it's no small secret at this point that step one is a little bit different from how it used to be. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It may be things that you've already heard, but just so we're all on the same page. And we're going to segue from there into talking a little bit about how to prepare for step two and what that, how to prepare for step one and step two. And so, again, if you've taken step one and maybe didn't get the result that you were hoping for, and are planning on taking it again, we'll give you the general lay of the land of what that will look like, and what that means, and how we best would recommend, the kind of the recommendations that we give our students. And then just some important considerations for step two CK. I think just to answer the question in a nutshell, if you've taken step one and you're retaking it again now that it's pass fail, I think this is going to be a big part of our talk tonight is how does step two fit into all of that. A few logistics over the course of the evening, kind of 3 points. As we go, the best way to communicate with us is through the chat. So we encourage questions, we encourage participation. So if there's anything that comes up that maybe isn't clear or you have questions about, you feel free to run those by us in real time. We'll do our best to tackle those as we go. Sometimes it's hard to talk and type at the same time. So we may not be able to get to all of them in real time, but we'll do our best. At the end, we have our Q&A session, which is my favorite part of these webinars, where anything and everything that you guys put in the chat that we didn't get to in real time, we'll address then. And then just an opportunity for you guys to run any questions by us as it relates to step one or step two and studying for all of these. And then we do have just a super quick survey that you'll get access to after this. It's really helpful for us just to have an idea of what we're doing well and what we can improve on. I know you guys get inundated with these things, and so we want to be respectful of your time. And it truly does take max 30 seconds and does do us a lot of good to kind of get that feedback. So buckle in. We'll hopefully be able to give you some helpful information tonight. And so kind of taking the kind of first part of our three-act series here is what has changed with step one. And so, David, I'll turn it over to you if you want to kind of give us the update, if you will, of what's happened and what that means. Oh, David, I'm afraid you might be on mute.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. So I think it's probably not so much of a surprise anymore, but step one has officially gone from a three-digit numeric score to a pass-fail scenario. This is something that had been talked about for many, many years. I think it was early last year is when I first heard that, like, okay, this was serious, really a change that was on the horizon. And then, of course, earlier this year, the change has officially been implemented for a pass-fail. So this poses the question, how does this affect me in my application? What do I do? Some people have previously taken the test and have a score. Do they take it again? Some people have taken it. They come from all different scenarios. And the question is, how does this affect your application? And so the overwhelming answer is it's tough to know for sure. We don't have, the data of years, what the easy answer might be is to say, well, they can just look at a step 2 score and see how how you do on that, and use that as kind of a metric. And so this, I think, can create a little bit of a tricky zone for students, right? Because historically, when we were preparing for step 1 and we were preparing for this 3-digit score, we gave it all of our effort and stuff. Sometimes students can find that a pass-fail scenario doesn't warrant the same force essentially in their preparation for the exam. And I think that, I can speak to this now from tutoring experience, but also from a practical experience, that this can be problematic, because what you'll find, as Mike and I have both gone through step 1 and step 2, and Mike's done step 3, is that a lot of these exams, the principles build on each other. And so the preparation that you have for step 1, regardless of if it's scored or if it's pass fail, is vital to your success on step 2 and your success on step 3. And so it really is about saying, okay, regardless of the scoring metric that's being used here, I want to prepare for this exam the best way I can. I want to be on a schedule and regimented. And that's really where I think that learning from people who have gone through the process, previously, and their successes and failures, and seeing many students go through the process themselves, I think getting those kind of opinions on how to go about it is the same. So overall, the scoring is different, and how it affects your application, it may not be somewhere that you can highlight yourself in application, but I think the preparation shouldn't veer that much. It shouldn't be that much different than it was prior. You should still take the test seriously and still try to learn as much as you can to really establish a good foundation for your medical knowledge.
Absolutely. I agreed 100%. And I think one, I know we said that we were going to address the questions and kind of over the chat and then at the end, but one great question that's already come in is it truly pass fail, or is there some kind of backdoor or score that you're still getting that's communicated to residency applications? And it's a fair question. I absolutely get it. The truth is, it really is pass fail. They've completely eliminated any kind of metric that might be able to be used. The 3-digit score is completely gone. Percentages are not reported. It truly is just a pass or a fail grade, and there's no other metrics that are reported to you or to any programs. All of that is kept stored away on a server that we'll never have access to. And so just again, to kind of highlight those points about what's happening here, step 1 really was, intended to be kind of a competency exam for people as they started their clinical clerkships. For many people, that was between 2nd and 3rd year of med school. There might be a movement more towards having clerkships a little sooner in their curriculum now. But it did kind of take on a little bit of a second role as that level playing field performance metric that residency applications or residency committees were using as a way to evaluate applications. It does have quite a bit of implications for residency applications now that it is pass fail. I know that people tuning in tonight might be on different timelines, and if you're applying into residency in the upcoming cycle, there's probably going to be a mix of people who have scores and who don't have scores. And probably maybe a little bit more with scores than maybe without. But going into the future, it's going to be pretty much exclusively pass fail. So we're not completely at that point where everyone is kind of on the system, but we're definitely getting there. And the next couple of years will be, just based on the timing of when people had taken the exam. And then just to quickly run through, I honestly, David, I think you kind of emphasized all of this already, that, step 1 kind of functioned as kind of a standardized exam. And, there is a question of like, what do we do now? And is there something that we use in lieu of that? And what does that mean? And I think we'll talk more about this as we go, but, I think that step 2 CK is going to be a piece of that puzzle. It won't be the whole story, but, it is a numerical grade. It probably maybe is a little bit more applicable to clinical medicine insofar as it's emphasizing your clinical skills and clinical knowledge. So something to keep an eye out for. So actually a great question that we've been getting, and kind of a lot of what motivated us to want to talk about this tonight is, what do you do if you took the test and didn't pass on your first attempt? I guess, like, David, if you had like a student in front of you that you're working with and they're in this kind of situation, what would be the kinds of things that you would counsel them about to navigate it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this scenario is something that we do come across. This is not like some random, rare, uncommon scenario. I just recently, within the last couple of months, had a student the same scenario where they didn't pass on their first attempt. They have since then taken it and passed the second time, which is amazing. I think the first thing that you have to do is, and a lot of our first session was spent talking about is some kind of self-assessment. What did you do? What went wrong? This student, to her credit, had some very specific reasons why she felt test day went the way that it went and why she didn't receive a passing test on the first time. And, for me, that was, very helpful, right? First of all, it's very impressive to have that kind of intuitive, reflection on one's own performance and stuff for something that didn't go your way. I thought was really a big deal. That's vital. What did you do? Where did you go wrong? And there was a lot of things she did where she was like, I only got through half of UWorld, some things that she knew wasn't even the best way to go about things. But she just didn't have a schedule. She didn't have the structure to really prepare herself for the exam in the right way. And so that's really what we did, to say, okay, here's what we tried the first time. What can we improve on? And it really was about getting some of that structure, getting some of that schedule going on. And certainly there was medical concepts that we had to revisit and talk about and discuss and really understand the pathophysiology and things like that. But, if you don't pass the first time, you have to kind of, sit down with yourself and say, why? This student, I would say that she didn't really feel that comfortable going into the exam. It was kind of a timing thing where it's like, oh, I just want to get this out of the way. And that's something that's going to be a little bit tricky now with the pass-fail system in terms of you're not obtaining a score. So you might get in this mindset where I just want to do just enough to pass. And then if test day doesn't go perfectly, you might not quite get there. And that's why I really want students to try to, continue to take the exam seriously in their preparation, because not only do you want to, do your best to pass on the first or second attempt, preferably the first, but you also want to set yourself up for your step 2 performance down the road.
100%. Yeah. And I think that the problem that you run into is that, you want to be able to demonstrate improvement. You want to be able to show like, hey, I may not have passed it on the first attempt, but like I worked really hard and I was far above average the second time I took it. And I did so much better. And I think that without having step 2 available to be step 1 being scored to be able to do that, it makes it all the more important to have like a step 2 CK score that gives you a 3-digit score available. And then you really, at the end of the day, your application is more than these board exams. So if you didn't pass on your first attempt, that's okay. You can make it up by, again, passing on your second attempt and ensure that you have other components of your medical school experience that prove that you're more than just a number and more than just a pass-fail grade. I think just to emphasize one point that we'll kind of dive into a little bit more as we go, is this first one up here, making sure that you are ready and feel comfortable that you will pass on your second attempt. And really what that's going to come down to is practice tests, making sure that practice tests are showing you scores that you want to see and are comfortably within that passing range. We'll discuss a little bit more about how that's changed with the new NDNEs, but that's going to be a running theme also through the course of the evening tonight. Okay, so segueing into how to study for step 1. Obviously, if you guys have taken it already, you have gone through some degree of a dedicated study period. And now, you probably have a lot of the knowledge that we're going to talk about how to approach this. But I think just to state it and help fine tune things so that we're all on the same page and have a good plan in place. So I guess, like, just broadly speaking, I'll turn it back over to you, David, in terms of resources that you like to recommend to students.
Yeah, lo and behold, the ones on your screen are kind of my top 2 ones. I think the thing with a study schedule and resources that I always like to tell my students, and why it's good to talk to them one-on-one, is that there are more than one ways to go about this. Like, there's many different ways you can go and you can have success on step 1 and step 2 and step 3. I would say there's a lot of ways you can have success, and there's a few ways that you would find that you wouldn't have success. Some of like the obvious ones, or if you didn't do UWorld, that would be not setting yourself up for success, when we know that UWorld is kind of a gold standard resource. Same thing with first aid and pathoma and sketchy. There's so many good resources. I will say that aside from UWorld, I have had students be very successful in the exam who, some of them don't use first aid, or they don't use sketchy, or they don't use pathoma. And so I think it's this understanding that there's not one specific schedule that works for everybody. There's not one specific resource. UWorld's kind of the exception that everyone has to have. But I think that those are the primary ones that you've heard of: Pathoma, Sketchy, UWorld, First Aid. Sometimes people will do like USMLE RX, QBanks, but it really depends on where you're at in your preparation. If you're in dedicated, you're trying to narrow your resources. Sometimes students will make a mistake where they get into dedicated and they think, oh, I'm missing out on this resource, I should add that to my toolkit. When really, when you get to dedicated, you should basically be down to like 2 or 3 resources tops. And from my own experience, that's basically what I did, where I did use a lot of the main resources. But when I got to dedicated, it was basically doing UWorld questions, cross-referencing First Aid. So the 2 on the screen are definitely primary options. People talk about resource overload as kind of a term that's thrown around a lot. And I think that's something that I certainly fell into at one point, that it's very easy to fall into. But what we need to understand as we're preparing for this exam is that a lot of these different resources cover the same information. And so we're not getting a deeper understanding, we're just continuously getting a superficial understanding. And so that's really what I think people should focus on, is pick 3 to 4 resources and really dive into those, really feel like you know as much as you possibly can, versus doing 6, 7, 8 resources and just kind of skimming the surface on them.
Absolutely. And I think just to, again, there's another great, I feel like I'm breaking my comment before about holding off on trying to answer questions in the chat, but you guys are giving great questions in real time. And so I think we can go ahead and address them in real time. I would honestly agree exactly with what David said, not just for your dedicated, but try not to get too overwhelmed, even as you're going through the different kind of blocks in your preclinical curriculum. Because it is easy to feel like, like I want to do a ton of sketchy videos and I want to watch a ton of boards and beyond, but I also want to do first aid in UWorld. This stuff applies for throughout. And if you're in your curriculum, like if you're in a neurology block or you're in a cardiology block, you might tailor your studying to what you're focused on in your first, second year of medical school. But the same principles still apply. First aid UWorld is going to be your central primary resources, and then kind of just as David was saying, you can have secondary resources that you can layer on that, like Pathoma or BRS, and these are just some examples. Honestly, there's a ton of them out there: Sketchy and Boards and Beyond, flashcards, etc. And the truth is that there really isn't a one size fits all. It's very tailored, it's very adapted to the individual person. But this is, that's the kind of beauty of what we do, is we can kind of figure out where people are and meet them there and try to help lead them to where they want to be. Okay, so then I guess kind of segueing from that, this is re-emphasizing what we've already talked about with the layering of resources. I think first aid really shines in how it helps you capture the scope of what the content is. If you are studying biochemistry or immunology, just to give some examples, these are expansive topics that people get many advanced degrees in, and you can dive further and further into the detail and get lost. And the reality is that probably if you're getting that far, it's not very high yield. First aid just gives you like greatest hits. These are what you need to know. These are the pathways that are important. These are the diseases that are clinically relevant. And really helps you keep you're not losing the forest for all of these trees. UWorld, again, I think I sound like a broken record when I'm working with people. I'm just like, you've got to do the questions. It's the single most important thing on the plan to me, is doing as many questions as you can. I generally say try to aim for a goal of at least 80 questions a day. In my mind, 120 is what sits best, because you're going to make good progress through the QBank and potentially have time to be able to do some of it over a second time. So that's kind of the sweet spot, if you will, of like 80 to 100. And just to put it in concrete numbers, this is the majority of your day. This is maybe like 5-6 hours of your studying. This may be like an hour or 2 of your studying, and then this may be like an hour or 2 of your studying. And if you do that, it comes out to maybe like an 8, 9, 10-hour workday. And I don't know, people have long attention spans, longer than mine, but I don't know if you can work much longer than 10 hours and not start to lose steam if you're doing this kind of day in and day out. So I think that's a very doable kind of plan. It's realistic, and we're going to talk more about what's realistic and what's not. But again, these are the things that, if you troubleshoot what happened the first time you were taking step 1. How did you study? How did you prepare? And if it didn't look like this, I'd kind of challenge you to try to figure out if that was working for you before, if you felt like you were learning, and if it wasn't, then the next time you're preparing for step one, as you're gearing up to take this again, give this a try, do it this way, and see if that makes the difference. You're going to know, you're going to do practice tests, you're going to see how things evolve. If this system isn't working for you, we can talk about that, but I'd be hard pressed to find someone who isn't able to get some benefit out of a style like this. All right, so this is, we have the same kind of topic represented in multiple different ways. But there's this 3-pass approach through your dedicated study period, basically ramping up the amount of UWorld that you're doing, 40 questions to 80 questions to maybe up to 120. And then and really getting an idea of the scope of the test and the general scaffold of what's tested, filling in blanks as you do more questions, and other supplemental things like flashcards. And then at the very end, really focusing in on that like really high yield stuff that's likely to show up on your test. I don't want to say this pass 3 is your cramming, but I don't like to say cramming at all, because it's just not the way to prepare for this. But it's kind of like you're like, I know I need to know this. I know it's going to show up. I want to review it one last time. Any other thought? I don't want to put you on the spot, David, but any other thoughts about any of this, or comments or suggestions?
Yeah, I think that, we've kind of talked about this point, is that there's not one way to approach this type of thing. I really like this diagram because it really echoes how I typically, will start a dedicated period with a lot of students that I work with, in that you will realize, if you haven't done much UWorld before, doing 80 questions a day or even 120 is very taxing on the brain. I often kind of talk about it in terms of like exercising, right? Like if you aren't going to the gym and then you like go to the gym really hard one day, you're going to be like tired the rest of the day completely. And so it's really hard to jump in. These UWorld questions are tough, they're tricky, and they're meant to be. And that's how you learn, right? You really want to feel like you've pushed your brain during the day. You really stretched it. You really worked it out so that you learn more information and you retain more information. And so this ability to kind of ease into it. And it's really what I did leading up to dedicated, where I would start doing 20 questions a day with my UWorld, then 40, then 60, and eventually 80. And I kind of capped it at 80 for me, because I like to, do some more review as well. But this approach to kind of ease into it, I think for a lot of students, when they haven't done this level of practice questions, right? Some of the other question banks maybe aren't as mentally straining as UWorld questions are, really easing into it, and being a little bit forgiving with yourself and your schedule, right? That's one thing, we're big on schedules and planning and stuff, but I always want students to know, and I remind my students that schedules are going to be a little bit fluid, right? It's not meant we don't need to make things more stressful than they already are, kind of a thing, right? If you get off schedule a little bit, that's okay. But what we do at the beginning is plan for that flexibility and stuff. And, these approaches of going through a first pass, second pass, third pass are great. Some people do one pass. There's a variety of different ways, but I really think that, ramping up your UWorld, getting up to your 80 questions a day or 120 is a good strategy in terms of how you go about this.
I love that analogy of like, you can't just dive in and like pick up, 200 pounds right out of the gate. You need to work your way up to that. And I think it's the exact same thing, you start off with what you can do and you slowly build on that. And it's something I've seen replayed many, many times. Like, we might have to start out below goal, like 40, 60 questions, and then we slowly work our way up. And almost inevitably, I feel like by the end of the study period, most people are hitting this goal of 120 questions a day and really feeling like they're getting a lot out of it. Awesome. Okay. So as you're developing your study plan, identify what your goals are going to be, figure out how you're going to what that's going to look like in terms of systems and just, I don't, Cram Fighters is obviously a blueprint product, and our goal isn't to try to market tonight, but it is actually a really, really good resource to help you divide up the work that you want to get done and make it very doable on a day-by-day basis. So just a plug for that there. And then just, have a general check in with yourself to make sure that the plan that you're doing is doable, is reasonable. And again, I think that's the beauty of Cram Fighters is it tells you like, here's how long it's going to take you each day to get done with what you're doing. And if it's like 19 hours, that's not possible. So you need to reevaluate. So anyway, what's your like general take on the calendars that you create with students?
Yeah, I think that it depends a little bit where they are. I would say most students that I'm with are in their dedicated period. So they, are almost done with kind of their coursework, or they're completely done, and all they have to do is study. And really, we start with kind of our primary blocks of things that we must do, which is, kind of so far been a resounding UWorld. Where can we get our UWorld blocks done? I think a big thing to think about too early on, and that we have to discuss, is how long does it take you to get a UWorld block done? There's obviously an hour's worth of questions to do a 40 question block. And then how long is that review process? I would say I'm a slow reviewer, if you will, and that I would give myself a full 4 hours to go through 40 questions, and which is why I never got to 120 for myself. I started UWorld a little bit earlier, so it worked out. But you can get down to maybe like a 3 hour time period where you're doing your 1 hour to do the questions and then 2 hours to review. And I would say a lot of students find comfort in kind of that 3 hour range. And so it really is, where are we doing our practice questions? Because that is, once we get to dedicated, although it always feels, and I tell my students, is it feels more comfortable to go back and review things again. It feels more comfortable to go watch Pathoma again or Boards and Beyond. To say, I haven't seen cardiac physiology, I don't remember, I'm going to get the question wrong, but that's okay. You learn a lot from getting questions wrong. So UWorld is really a good learning tool. So it's setting our UWorld times. I usually have students do them in the morning. I think it's one of those things, again, back to the gym analogy. It's a lot easier just to wake up and get to work and do it than to wait till 7 p.m. at night and then try to drag yourself to the gym, or then try to drag yourself to do another block of UWorld. So we start with kind of UWorld, a block or two in the morning and in the afternoon. And then it's really about, dedicated is about targeted focusing on your weak areas. It's not the time to review everything you've ever learned. You will be amazed at how much stuff will be in your brain, and maybe you can't actively recall it if I ask you, but if I present it to you in a multiple choice question, that information is in there somewhere. So if you know you're really good at pulmonology, that you did really well in that block, you don't need to spend as much time reviewing that, even though it's easier to do and it feels better. You don't need a 3-hour review block every day for pulm. Now, let's say nephrology or renal stuff is, that physiology, that pharmacology is not very good for you. You didn't do as well in that block. You're noticing on your UWorld questions that you have a lower percentage. That's where the targeted study time is. That's where you do take that hour or two at the end of the day that Mike was talking about to go back and revisit Pathoma or to go back through first aid. But really, schedules and dedicated are built around doing the most strenuous work, doing what you get the most reward out of. And that's most often practice questions in UWorld.
I love that. And I feel like you said it super beautifully. I think that the reality is this test is not like a classroom exam where, it's going to be an end of quarter test over chapters 1, 2, and 3 of the textbook. And if you know chapters 1, 2, and 3 cold, you're going to get 100%. Like, there's just so much they could ask you about. And your goal is to just identify your areas, your knowledge deficits, and fill those in as much as possible. With the recognition, you're not going to know everything they could test you on, but as long as you learn as much as you can to get as many questions right as possible, you're operating with maximum efficiency. Time is your limiting reagent here. Otherwise, people do different styles with the calendar. Some people like to mix things up a little bit and have more like mixed questions. Some people want it very organ system based. You can go back and forth, honestly, as long as you're hitting the questions. That's the most important thing to me. I think organ system based is a little nice up front because it helps you feel organized. It helps you kind of have a systematic approach. But as you get closer and closer to your dedicated study period, you want to I'm closer and closer to your exam, you want to start mixing things so that you make it more as similar to test day as possible. And then I just to make sure that it's addressed tonight for you guys, there's obviously a big change to the NBMEs too, the practice tests that you're taking. And if you haven't done one yet, or if you haven't and have questions about it, the style is different, where they don't give you a 3-digit score on these either. And instead, what they're going to give you are 2 numbers, an equated percent correct and a likelihood of passing. The equated percent correct is not the number of questions you got right divided by the number of questions on the test. It's a little bit more complicated than that. They adjust it for the difficulty of the practice test that you took. But what it does is it kind of normalizes every NBME onto like a level playing field. That you want to be at least a 61%, just to give you guys concrete numbers. 61% is the low passing minimum. for a lot of the NBMEs, and that corresponds to a likelihood of passing of about 83%. In the real world, I personally would like to have a likelihood of passing higher than 83%. It's a 1 in 6 chance of not passing, especially if you've taken it already. You really, really, really need to avoid the scenario of not passing on your second attempt too. And I would want you to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row to be very confident that that doesn't happen. So what I typically aim for is a likelihood of passing at least 90, 95%. And that shakes out to an equated percent correct of about 65, 66%. These numbers may not mean a whole lot right now if you haven't done an NBME recently, but if you do one, you get this report back and you don't know what to do with the numbers, tune back in or review this recording just to see how that stacks up. Anyway, okay, so enough of my tangent. We'll move on. I think we kind of addressed this before a little bit when we were talking about cram fighters and using the cram fighter study schedule. But just be realistic, be kind to yourself. You can't study 19, 20 hours a day. It's just not possible. You can't study 7 days a week. You need to have a day off built in for your mental health. It's also just going to be diminishing returns. The difference between studying 1 and 2 hours is a lot. Like if you're going to study 1 hour on a given day versus 2 hours, that's a huge difference. The difference between studying 13 hours on a given day and 14 hours, like that 14th hour of studying is not going to be super high quality. You're going to be tired, you're going to be burned out, you're going to want to do something else. So just be realistic. How much bang are you getting for the effort that you're putting in? Build in some flexibility. Stuff's going to happen. Life doesn't stop for these exams. I know you guys have been, if you've been through a dedicated study period, you might know the ins and outs of what to expect, but just to restate it so we're all on the same page. Don't burn yourself out. Make sure you're doing quality studying. All right. And then just some general tips that I'll turn it back over to you, Dave, to run through kind of any other pearls, not clinical pearls, but test taking pearls for step 1.
Yeah. So I think that, there's a lot of good tips here. So we've kind of touched on some of these already, but we'll kind of revisit them. First aid is meant to be a reference resource, right? A lot of people get in this idea that, hey, first aid medical school, if I just read first aid 25 times and I just remember every word, I'm just going to ace this test. But as Mike mentioned, it's not entirely just a knowledge-based test, right? It's really about taking this foundation of knowledge and applying it to unique scenarios. And I often try to make correlations with students in sessions, say, okay, well, here's a concept of hemorrhagic shock. They might try to trick you and make it seem like something foreign by presenting it as like a mouse model in a research lab. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't know, I didn't learn anything about mice in undergrad or in the first year of med school, but that's not the point. There's a basic science concept and they're really trying to get that critical knowledge. So first aid is good as a reference to your other resources, but reading it, every night is probably not the only thing that we should be doing. We talked about not doing too many resources. Like I said, a lot of resources are going to have overlapping material. So you really want to pick the ones, the top few that are people before you have had success with, you've heard about, and really use those. And it's much better to go in depth with those resources than to spread yourself too thin with 4 or 5 resources. As far as UWorld, this one's tough because UWorld, it's so good at teaching you, but it gives you so much information. You will see, if you haven't already, when you click through a UWorld question, the explanations are like 2 pages long each. So that's impossible to remember everything. I would say most of us probably recommend that you always review every question you get right and every question you get wrong. I try to have students read through every word that's on the UWorld, but I really want them looking at that bottom section where it's kind of the take-home point, the key point of that question, and internalizing that. So again, you're not going to remember every question from UWorld. It's a lot of text, but just kind of reading it over and over and over and getting the concepts repeated to you is going to be really, really helpful. Talked about the schedule. It will and it must change. It's, there's a lot of good scheduling things. Cram fighters is a good option. And you have to be able and willing for yourself to adjust that schedule, right? If you say, Mike and I share this kind of thought that, like, I know some people that were studying for 16 hours a day, and I don't think that they did better than the people that studied 10 hours a day, right? It's this quality versus quantity thing. But if you are too rigid with yourself, if you say, oh, I didn't get my 100 UWorld questions done today, and then you start piling them on, and now all of a sudden by Friday, you have like a 20-hour day, well, that's not going to work either. So you have to be able to kind of be fluid and say, how do I spread out this workload? I didn't get as much done on Monday as I wanted to. How do I spread it out over the next week so that I can catch up a little bit? Those are super, super important. Don't overstudy a topic, I think, is a very classic thing that students run into. I say, what's your best subject? And they're like, hemonc. And I'm like, what are you studying right now? They're like, oh, hemonc, I love it. I know you love it. And then that's awesome. You want to be a hematologist in the future. But I think that what I always have to remind students, and it's good to be mindful of, is to prepare for what's in front of you. You know, if you want to be a hematologist one day, that's excellent. You'll take those boards. But what's in front of you is basically a test that is has a lot broader in terms of knowledge base that you need to have for the exam. And so again, finding those weak areas is really probably one of the best tips that I can give you tonight. Is if you're uncomfortable with MSK, that's what you should work on, is MSK. That's where you can get the most amount of points, right? If you're doing MSK and you're getting 2 out of 10 questions right, but then you're doing GI and you're getting 9 out of 10 questions right, well, to talk about kind of the point of diminishing returns, well, your GI, let's say you get that extra question right, now you're 10 out of 10 on GI, your money. But the MSK, you had 8 questions more you could have gotten right? You're only getting 2 out of 10. Now you can get 6 out of 10. That is going to have a much more impactful difference on your score than if you're just studying the stuff you already know. Keep in mind, high yield, don't waste time. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. And that has to go with both resources that you use in terms of high yield resources, but also high yield content, right? And I think that's something where you can talk to tutors or people at your school and say, what kind of stuff is repeatedly shown up on these exams?
I love that. And I just, to emphasize that point, like, focus on things that you don't feel comfortable with. I think there is a natural tendency to feel like I just really don't like, I don't know, cardiac pharmacology. So I'm just going to pretend like that doesn't exist. And that might feel good in the moment, like, okay, I don't have to worry about it because it's not a thing. But the reality is, like, that's exactly what you should be spending your time on. Because if you're studying things you already know, you're kind of spinning your wheels. Like, great, you're kind of feeding yourself positive feedback. Yeah, I've got this. But there's just so much more out there that you could be studying to get those questions right. So really can't emphasize that enough. And then just to round out, I know we've talked a lot about UWorld up until now, and just to close that out, I think that David brought this up earlier, but UWorld is a learning tool. It's okay to get questions wrong. Like, that's its entire purpose. I don't care. Oftentimes students will report to me like, hey, I'm getting 50% of the questions right in the block, or I'm getting 65% of the questions right in the block, or I'm getting 35%. And honestly, like, it could be any number, and it wouldn't make a difference to me. As long as, even if you're getting 0% of the questions right, as long as you're learning what you need to get that question right in the future, that's all that I care about. That's the single most important thing. So making sure that you recognize that this is more formative feedback to make you better, and not summative feedback. That's where the practice tests come in. And I really can't state that enough, because I find that it's often a barrier. Like, people don't want to do the UWorld because they're frustrated by the percentages they're getting. They're like, I want to review other things. I want to learn the content in other ways, so that when I go to do the UWorld, I already know it. I'll get the question right, and I get that positive feedback. And the reality is that the entire purpose of the UWorld was to learn it in the first place. So you're kind of doing it a little bit backwards. Consider repeating your incorrect questions. Don't feel like you need to turn UWorld into a textbook. The entire purpose of it is for you to get active learning, to look at content, try to figure out what the right answer is or what the wrong answer is, put your nickel down on something and see if you got it. And I think it really engages you in the moment. And people have a tendency to deep dive into the explanations in a way where you're becoming more of a passive reader. And so that's just a little bit of a tip in terms of how to approach it. Ways to avoid making it more of a textbook and passive learning: try to pick out things you don't know from the explanation, and maybe make 1 or 2 takeaways. It helps pick up your efficiency to work through more of the UWorld and not get too bogged down in explanations. But And as you're going through and you're reading through a paragraph or a table, like, oh, I didn't know that was the treatment, or I didn't know that was um, the mechanism of that drug, and just make that what you're going to take away from the question. It could be the educational objective, just like David was mentioning before. And if you do that 4,000 times, that's 4,000 facts that you now have at your disposal, and you're going to be that much smarter and that much more prepared. So anyway, again, just to restate it before, if you took step one before, did not get the result that you wanted, think about what you did last time and what that looked like, and maybe consider trying to realign with this model and see if that helps or if that makes a difference in your practice tests going forward. Okay, all right, with that, we'll kind of switch gears again, and we're going to talk a little bit more about step 2 CK. Only insofar as obviously the purpose of this today is to focus on step 1, but just to give a little bit more of a background on step 2 and what that, as it relates to having a 3-digit score on your application now that step 1's pass fail. Okay, so I'll turn it back over to you, David, if you want to talk through kind of the timing of when to take step 2 CK.
Yeah, I think the timing, as with most things that will answer the unsatisfactory answers, it depends, of course. When I took step 2 last year, like during COVID, it was a little bit of a different time because I had a 3-digit step 1 score. I was preparing to do a sub internship. So I kind of wanted to take step 2 to get it out of the way, if you will, before my sub internship. So that's a much different situation than students might find themselves in now, where you might have a step 1 score, you might be doing pass fail, and then you prepare for step 2 down the road. I think that, ideally you want to take step 2 seriously, maybe even more serious than before. But again, that's building on your step 1 preparation. So I would say most people in my class were taking step 2 of their 3rd year in the kind of spring to early summertime. This was allowing them enough time to do sub internships during the summer. Late in the summer, some students were doing away rotations at other institutions. Depends a little bit on what specialty you're going into, whether or not you'll do that. And so I think really that kind of summer after is really when you want to take step 2. And as far as taking shelf exams, that is kind of school specific from my understanding of it. And it's changed even a little bit with COVID rotations and stuff. Some schools will have you basically take a shelf exam after your rotation. So you do your internal medicine and then you end with a shelf exam. At my school, it was a free for all. You could take shelf exams anytime that you wanted. So I would do like 2 or 3 rotations. I might do family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, and then I would take a few weeks to study and prepare for those shelf exams. I think shelf exams are really one of your best ways to kind of keep honest in terms of your preparation for step 2. They are building on information that you need for step 2. You're going to realize as you get to them that there's a lot of information from step 1 that you either know or you were expected to know that you build on. And so I would say from a scheduling perspective, taking those shelf exams kind of spread out throughout your 3rd year in preparation for step 2 is a good idea. And then for actually taking step 2, I think most people take it spring, summer, before your applications are typically due in the fall.
100% on every front. And I think that it's not intended to be like, saying the stakes are higher is not intended to be like a point, just, if you haven't passed step 1, the truth is the stakes are higher for everyone now that step 1 is pass fail. But I wouldn't see it as like something scary. I'd see it as an opportunity. Now that step 2 really is your only 3-digit score in your application, if you didn't do as well as you wanted the first time around on step 1, you don't really get an opportunity to redeem yourself on that test, but you do on this one. And so think about these considerations. Like, it's obviously a complicated decision of when to take step 2, but I really do want to encourage you to maybe try to get, do what you can to study and be prepared and get the score that you want. But if you're able to perform well, do it in a timeline where you're going to be able to include that with your application materials so that people see that and that people can look and realize, step 1 maybe didn't go your way, but you really worked hard. You showed a great deal of resilience. You had a huge delta and you performed phenomenally on step 2. And I think that'll go miles towards advancing your application. So just a little bit more, just so this again might be a little bit overwhelming right now, but just so you guys have heard it. And, if you are getting to that point of preparing for step 2, you can come back and look at this or take notes on it now that you'll save for later. UWorld is still going to be your best friend for preparing for this test. Again, sound like a broken record, but that's the reality. It's the single best thing. Other Q banks like Amboss is great. Online MedEd is a great platform that has a lot of good videos. I don't know if I put it necessarily underneath the main resources, but definitely somewhere in between main and supplementary. Some textbooks that are commonly used for preparation are Step Up to Medicine, Step Up to Step 2 CK, First Aid for Step 2 CK, Master the Boards. There's a long list. Bastana's surgery notes for the surgery rotation and for surgery stuff on Step 2. I will say that there is no textbook like First Aid when it comes to Step 2. There's no like, wow, this has what I need to know. This is like my one-stop shop. It doesn't really exist. So just so you know, it's really going to be UWorld is your central primary resource.
Yeah, I'll make one point on that too,
Yeah.
talking about the textbook thing and something that I found myself, my personal experience, and then from tutoring several students in the exam. The Step 2 CK, the US Only resource book, is an option, but truthfully, I have found that using Step 1, the one that you took notes in or whatever, is actually a really good option for Step 2 as well, because again, you will find so much information that is being built on from your Step 1 information. And also from a publishing perspective, the Step 1 book is essentially their pride and joy. They update it every year, versus the Step 2 CK and the CS formerly and 3 as well is not something they update quite as frequently. So I think that the Step 1 resource is actually really helpful for Step 2. I supplemented that with, as Mike mentioned, UWorld and Amboss. That's basically, I use those 3 things for all my shelf exams and my Step 2, and I found them to be, a great base of information for the exam.
I agree 100%. And I think that's honestly, a great plug for just, it might feel weird to use a Step 1 resource for Step 2, but there is a lot of overlap between them. They are different tests, but there is a lot of overlap between them. And so agreed 100%. That's a great point. And this is just a little bit of just to give you guys an idea of what Step 2 covers, because it might seem like a little bit of a mystery. It's going to be mostly medicine. And what we mean by medicine, think about those sections out of First Aid for Step 1 of like cardiology, pulmonology, renal, GI. This is what we're talking about. There are going to be other things that percolate into this, but these are the same kind of things that also show up in First Aid. The ped stuff, psychiatry, things that you maybe might not have had as much exposure to preparing for Step 1, and you're going to have to be deliberate about when you go to study for Step 2, either after clerkships or if you're kind of doing them in rapid succession. Keep an eye out for surgery, and especially keep an eye out for OBGYN. There's just a lot of content here that this is one area where maybe Step 2 doesn't really overlap as great with Step 1. A lot of the obstetrics is more clinically oriented, not as heavily tested on Step 1. And so you might have to spend some time going back and reviewing this. But, again, talk to us. We're happy to discuss what that looks like and how to do it. There is a little bit of an art to Step 2 too, that is a whole nother webinar for a different evening. Okay. All right. Well, we talked your ear off enough tonight. But thanks so much for tuning in and staying along with us. I think just again, so you guys have an idea of who we are and what Blueprint is. Obviously, this webinar, if it wasn't clear, this webinar is brought to you tonight by Blueprint and Grant Fighters. By Blueprint. The team here at Blueprint is a group of people who have been through the process, have taken these tests. Both David and myself have taken these tests, and all the people that we work alongside kind of know what the ins and outs look like, and want to be able to kind of work with you guys to help use our experiences and what we've learned works and we've learned doesn't work to help you study smarter and not necessarily harder, but to study smarter. Long track record of success for really every step of the game. So everything from before med school through Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, even board exams after that. It's a whole cohort of advanced medical students, kind of 3rd and 4th year medical students, many residents like myself and David, and then even fellows and attendings who just really love being able to work with people and realize your goals. There's nothing, honestly, really what it all boils down to is, you kind of develop a dynamic with the student you're working with, and having that feedback once they take their test and get the score that they want is really what it's all about. We just want to put a little plug in if you chime into today, or we have a sale running. So if you kind of log into our website, we are running a promotion 10% on tutoring. You basically work with people just like David and myself. I have a cohort of students, David does too, and so we are the same people who are doing this. And so with that, we will begin our live Q&A session. Just to put in one more plug, sorry guys. Also, Cram Fighter, we have a promotion that's running to 20% on 6 and 12-month packages. And so the code for that is dedicated 22, and you can find that at this URL right here. So I think we already have some questions that have come through in the chat that we can chime in on, but want to encourage you guys to keep running questions by us, because this is your chance. Okay, so I guess one good question that's come up is if you are an international medical graduate and applying into residency, things have obviously changed with, we mentioned there's no step 1 pass fail. There's of course no more step 2 CS. Are there opportunities besides step 2 CK, or what should you do about step 2 CK or approach that to try to be as competitive as possible? So David, I might turn that one over to you if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that, we've known that step 1 has kind of been used, rightfully or wrongfully as a benchmark, if you will, of aptitude and stuff. And so I do think, for what makes sense, I guess, and from talking from program directors, that step 2 could somehow fill that in a way, right? There's so much more to an application than obviously a numeric score in terms of, whether or not you get a spot in residency. But from a program's perspective, right, they're getting sometimes thousands of applications for, maybe 3 or 4, 10 spots. And so for them to review 1,000 applications is obviously not super practical. And so they're always striving for ways to, reduce the number of applications that they have to visit and stuff. And that's what step 1 has kind of done in the past for certain specialties more than others. Not all specialties are like that. Some specialties are not as interested in your scores. So that's a bit of a different conversation. But I do think step 2 could fill a little bit of that void. I also think that, programs are kind of seeing this as, well, maybe in the future, step 2 might go pass fail as well. Maybe we should expand on what we're looking at with our applicants. Maybe we should expand on what their whole application looks like in personal statement. But I think, to the question being asked, how much does step 2, matter to be interesting? I think it's going to matter quite a bit. And again, I'll just kind of reiterate that I think, for the people here, if you will, it's the secret is that people are going to probably not prepare for step 1 as much as they used to. And that's going to show in their step 2, and they're not going to know about it until after the fact. So really to succeed and, be interesting on step 2, I think is really to prepare for step 1 as if it was a numeric score, as if you were trying to get the highest score possible, right? Within reason, right? Taking care of, other things outside of medicine, but not having it of a goal just to pass. You want to have it a goal to really understand the foundations, because you'll find that when you get to step 2, things are a lot easier and the content is already there. And that will allow you to get a score that's interesting if you're preparing along the whole way.
Perfect. Agreed 100%. And I love that point you bring up about, I think there's so much overlap between step 1 and step 2. And it'll be interesting to see how with step 1 becoming pass fail, how that percolates into people's performance on step 2. So I think it all again points towards, you need to know this stuff. And it's going to get tested one way or another. And I think that step 2 is going to take on a lot of importance to that end. So there is a question here about the communication style questions on step 1, and how to prepare for that, and how First Aid and UWorld can help with that. There isn't, unless something has changed without my knowledge, there isn't a communication section on step 1. It's not like a bona fide separate portion of the exam, but they do have communication style questions, which what that means is basically, if you have a patient in front of you, they'll give you options of what you might say to the patient. And to answer the question that we have, I think 100% that UWorld is going to test you on that. They're going to give you examples of that. The truth is, there really isn't any resource out there that's optimal for quote unquote ethics questions. The kind of what would you do? There are things that you can memorize about what makes a minor so-called emancipated, or what is privileged information that needs to remain confidential. These are things or what is the difference between what is a healthcare proxy? What is all of these other kind of ins and outs of practice? But all of that, I think, is, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, best practiced with UWorld questions. And so yes, I do think UWorld is sufficient for the communication style questions on step one. All right. And then let's see what else there is. And David, if you see any, feel free to.
Yeah, someone kind of asked about how important step two would be for the upcoming cycle, kind of given we are going to be in this transition phase potentially where some people have a pass fail and a scored exam. I think that as someone who literally just came off of the interview trail and master residency, obviously, what I've found in my experience and stuff is that the scores are, they do have some level of importance for getting you interviews and getting you plugged into a program. Once that's kind of settled, that they feel, really what they're looking for is this, person in a good shape to pass their boards in the future, right? They want to have a successful group of residents and stuff. And so sometimes there are screening metrics, but I think once you get through those screening metrics, they really do start to look at the rest of the application in terms of personal statement and shadowing and volunteering and things like that, and research. But what I will say is that, and this is it's a mindset shift almost for, we're thinking about step one and step two and step three. Yes, we're learning information for an exam, but as Mike said earlier, step two is a big clinical exam, right? So this is medical information that we need to know kind of for patient care. For someone that's going into intern year, I'm going to be doing all kinds of different rotations and stuff. I'm going to have a surgery rotation. I need to know my surgery, even though I'm not going into surgery. And so that kind of mindset of like just learning the information the best you can to be a good provider and then doing well in step two is kind of an aside. But I do think there is some importance, but we need to recognize that it's not the whole application. But just learning the medicine to really, thrive in your knowledge base, I think is a good way to look at it.
Awesome. Let's see if anyone has anyone. I'm trying to go back through to make sure we got all of the other questions. There's maybe one more here. If you are a DO student, had taken the COMLEX and STEP, passed one but didn't pass the other, how would that kind of influence the calculation? And I would say, I don't know if it makes, I don't know if it would change what you should do. I think at the end of the day, going forward, still your goal is going to be if you're retaking that exam that you didn't pass on the first attempt, make the preparation that you need to make sure you pass on the second attempt. And then just, ideally in a perfect world, you have some kind of 3-digit score at some point to be able to demonstrate some delta, some improvement. So ideally having a step two or some other 3-digit score available on some objective measure that is included with your material so people can see your improvement. Another good question. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in tonight. I hope this was helpful. I just want to put in one more quick plug for the survey at the end. Really love getting your guys' feedback, and it really does take 30 seconds. But otherwise, I hope this was helpful. And thanks so much for tuning in.